They don't use buru finish us for this country. Let us watch this video. I prepared this video myself. Yes, but let us watch first.
Good day, Nigerians. Let's talk about Tinubu and how much he has borrowed since he took over from President Buhari. In May 2023, a new administration took the reins of Africa's largest economy, carrying with it the weight of expectation, the urgency of reform, and the reality of a nation already navigating deep fiscal pressures. As President Bola Ahmed Tinubu stepped into office, Nigeria's public debt stood as both a reflection of past decisions and a looming question about the future. At that moment, the numbers told a story many could not ignore. By June 2023, just at the dawn of the administration, Nigeria's total public debt hovered around 87 trillion naira, a staggering figure that echoed across economic discussions, policy rooms, and everyday conversations among citizens. But the story didn't stand still. As months passed, the debt figures began to climb, quietly at first, then more visibly. By December 2023, the upward movement was already evident, driven by the government's need to fund budgets, stabilize the economy, and respond to pressing national demands. Then came December 2024, a defining checkpoint, when the debt surged to approximately 144 trillion naira. Interestingly, in dollar terms, the figure appeared lower than expected, not because the burden had eased, but because the naira itself had weakened, reshaping the valuation of external obligations. And still the story continued. By December 2025, Nigeria's total public debt reached about 159 trillion naira. In just over 2 years, the country had added roughly 72 trillion naira to its debt profile, a number so large it almost defies imagination. Yet behind that figure lies a complex web of decisions, pressures, and global realities. To understand this rise, you have to look deeper. A significant portion of the borrowing came from external sources, particularly multilateral institutions. Billions of dollars flowed in, largely from the World Bank, aimed at supporting power infrastructure, healthcare systems, education, social safety nets, and economic stabilization efforts. These weren't just abstract figures. They were funds tied to real sectors affecting everyday lives. At the same time, there were broader borrowing plans, ambitious, far-reaching, including multi-billion-dollar approvals designed to finance infrastructure, support national budgets, and even refinance existing debts. These moves signaled a government attempting to balance immediate needs with long-term strategy. But the borrowing didn't stop at international lenders. Domestically, the government leaned heavily on Nigeria's own financial markets. Treasury bills, federal government bonds, and other instruments became key tools in raising funds. In the first year alone, over 20 trillion naira was borrowed locally, a clear indication of how deeply the government relied on internal mechanisms to bridge its fiscal gaps. And then came the cost of it all. Debt servicing, the silent weight behind borrowing, began to rise sharply. By 2025, Nigeria was spending over 16 trillion naira just to service its debts. To put that into perspective, that figure had more than doubled from what it was in 2023. A significant portion of government revenue was now being used not to build new roads, not to fund schools or hospitals, but simply to pay off existing obligations. This is where the story becomes more than just numbers. Because debt in itself is not the enemy. Nations borrow. Economies expand through strategic financing. Infrastructure gets built, reforms get implemented, and growth can be accelerated, but only when borrowed funds are used effectively. And that's the heart of the conversation unfolding across Nigeria today. Supporters of the administration point to efforts being made, repayments to international bodies, targeted investments in key sectors, and attempts to stabilize the economy during a turbulent global period. They argue that these borrowings are necessary steps toward long-term recovery and development. Critics, however, raise pressing concerns. They question sustainability. They ask whether the pace of borrowing matches the nation's capacity to repay. And perhaps most importantly, they demand transparency, clear, visible outcomes that show exactly how every borrowed naira is being used. Because for millions of Nigerians, this isn't just a fiscal report. It's about daily life. It's about whether roads improve, whether electricity becomes stable, whether jobs are created, and whether the economy becomes more resilient. It's about whether the burden of today's borrowing will become the opportunity of tomorrow, or a challenge passed on to future generations. And so, the story continues to unfold. Figures will change. Policies will evolve. New loans may be approved, while others are repaid. But one truth remains constant. Borrowing is only as powerful as what it builds. In the end, Nigerians are not just watching the numbers. They are watching the results. They are asking questions. And they are waiting for accountability, for impact, and for a future that justifies every kobo borrowed. This is Nani Fight C4. Stay informed, because this story is far from over.
Nigerians, you have been hearing how many billions, how many trillions that Nigeria government borrowed. Now, tell me if there's anything to show that this type of money was borrowed. And remember, they removed fuel subsidy. Remember, we still generate internal revenue in this country. Tell us where that money is going to. Tell us where that money is going to.